Silvana, how are you
Hi,
doing?
good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Welcome. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being the inaugural podcast. I appreciate it. It's been like
I'm happy to be here.
yeah, it's been time. It's been like what, like probably like a month or so, trying to get everything set up. But
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
doing it.
especially meeting in person and then that not working out, but that's okay. We're
Right.
here now.
It's like there was like some pandemic going on or something like that was keeping us away from it.
Right, I know something that's making us indoors for a long period of time.
Something everybody expected. Yeah. So
Yeah,
so explain to people, what do you currently do? I know that you're studying
yeah,
for like your
right. Yeah, so yeah, currently I am going to school to be an LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor in pretty much every state, or it's called a different title in some other states, but typically it's just to get your license with the state to open up your own private practice as a mental health therapist, or you can work in like a hospital or a rehab or like behavioral health firm, a jail, anything like that as a counselor also. So like it's more or less a wide range type of license, because there are like addiction counselor, school counselor, but this license allows you to work with pretty much any demographic that you want, like, choose to. You can do marriage and family, trauma, anything, because pretty much everybody's dealing with multiple facets of, issues. So you kind of get trained in, everything, and get exposure to everything, so that if you decide to open up your own practice, you're able to. So I've been doing that for, the school has been, it's almost been 3 years in the education. And then I have about, I'll have about 3 years of education. And then in a few months, I start my internship for that. So it's crazy. Time flew.
It's a mouthful.
Yes, it's a lot.
So you
Learn
you
a lot.
mentioned a bunch of different avenues that you can use the LPC. Like you mentioned the prisons and
Mhm.
families and stuff like that. Is there one aspect that you would want to use the LPC for?
Yeah, I think I've always had a special, I had went into the program initially, feeling confident that I wanted to work with, severe mentally ill, and I always wanted to work with, trauma, like patients in regards to like, or trauma clients, like, military, um, fire, police. So that was kind of like my frame of mind going into the program, is what I wanted to specialize in. And then going through the program, I think it kind of gave me a good perspective that, well, I had initially wanted that background. Let me backtrack. I wanted that background because I have a close family member that has schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, my dad. So that
Okay.
was really traumatic growing up with that. I think having a good grasp on how to, I guess, handle someone with a severe mental illness, and, he had served, he was in the Air Force, and he was a New York fireman. So he had a lot of trauma from that. And then he also had a lot of trauma, growing up, that kind of, it all kind of
Like
went
a
together
compound
for,
effect almost, right?
right, right. So then growing up, it was a lot of, I think, mania, like a lot of emotional mania, like, and he kind of pushes and pulls. He doesn't trust the world. We weren't allowed to let people in, the house. We were always told to like not trust people and not let them in. And, and being young and being like a clean slate, you kind of start to isolate yourself and think that that's like the
The
truth.
normal, right?
Right,
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
especially at
So
that young age where you're so impressionable, because your dad is essentially giving you the template to how the world is.
how to
You know
view
what I mean?
everything.
So
Yeah,
exactly. And so
right,
that's in that, yeah, exactly. So I
right.
definitely understand that. I took a
Yeah,
psychopathology class this last quarter and learned about like reading the DSM and stuff like that. And
yeah,
the like the onset of like schizophrenia is like usually right, or like a little later in life than people would initially think. Like, oh, the kid's born with their XYZ, but it kind of happens a little bit later in life. Like the first onsets usually happen That's
Right.
what the DSM said. It was like the between the ages of like 18 or 25, somewhere even up to like 30 years old. When
Right.
did your dad share with you like when that first happened for him?
I think for him, it had always kind of like, from what I hear from my mom, even from like older stories, because they met when he was 20 and she was 16, so they've known each other. They've known each other for a long time. I think he's always had a general sense of paranoia, like, even living and growing up in New York, you do have to have like a, being in the boroughs, like here you get robbed, all that stuff. So he
Right.
had a New Yorker paranoia, but I think the more bad things happened, I think that kind of validated a lot for him. And so he kind of kept on having reasons to continue to put like a glass around him almost. It's kind of like you get to a point, I think, with schizophrenia as you like age, where if like one traumatic thing happens that like breaks your trust, that you're done, like emotionally, mentally, you're done. You don't let anyone in anymore. There's no receptivity. So I think for him in schizophrenia, it's the most functioning, severe mentally illness. Like you can be a full functioning adult and no one knows you have it. And
You
then
may not
behind
even know that you have it, right?
right, yeah, behind closed doors. And that's actually like why later in life I ended up going to therapy myself, because I had started dating someone that kind of started to project like the way I thought on me, and was like, you're really like, having trouble trusting people, and you're like the stuff you deal with is so deep, like I can't give you suggestions because I'm not a counselor, I'm not anything. You should go to therapy, like you're really suffering. So when I got older, looking back at everything with my dad and everything, I started to kind of take what I was learning in therapy, and piece that with like, okay, looking back, this is why I felt this way, and this is why I'm kind of like undoing everything. But I had initially went into therapy being afraid that I got like schizophrenia. So it was kind of funny, because I had to start to kind of like take everything like back. I had to like understand from the past and then work my way up to kind of undo everything. And I think
Right.
looking back at like high school and even earlier than that, I had such deep issues with letting anyone in. And I really, my sister is still pretty much the same way. She never really went to therapy. So she holds like surface level relationships and won't really let people in more than a certain point. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way we were raised a little bit. I'm like an open book now. It took me 5 years of therapy to get to this point, but slowly and surely, you start to like learn this is like, people are safe. It's okay. Like, it was a lot. My first relationship was I took a lot of what I learned from my dad, and I would like I followed him. Like at certain times I didn't believe what he was doing, and I felt this general sense of not being safe all the time. Like I couldn't understand that when you're not with the person physically, you can still trust them. Like, so
Mm.
I always was with him. And then as soon as like I wasn't with him physically, it was like a general sense of like utter anxiety. And I would like forget his character, I would forget who he was. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, he's out cheating on me. And, would just make up all this stuff in my head. And there were a few times where he would tell me, oh, I'm at the tutoring center, and I would just do a drive-by, like, because I genuinely didn't understand how to trust him. Like, I
Right.
didn't understand that. So
Right.
it took me a long time to kind of like be like, okay, generally people are good. Like, there will be people that lie and, do bad things, but it's really on them. And so that's kind of like, it's not on you, it's on them. So like, if someone does something poor to me now, well, and it actually turned out the guy I was dating for my first 5 years of ever having a relationship, he ended up cheating on me. And it was the craziest thing, because that was the thing that I feared the most.
Mm-hmm.
And like, when I actually got to that point where he had cheated, old me would have like completely crumbled and never let anyone in again. And, you know, I if I had not gotten therapy and everything and had been working to be better at that point, but I think I was already working on so much that I ended up turning to friends and stuff instead, and just being like, he has issues, like it's okay, like I'm okay. You know, it took me a while to get back into dating after that. It took me like a year of just like more, you know, complete overwhelm of like, you know, being so overwhelmed by that. But I did start dating again, and it's fine, you know. So I think, yeah, therapy definitely helped a lot. And then I think seeing, you know, my dad now where he is, he's gotten to a point, you know, we had lived in New York, we moved to Arizona, and my mom ended up divorcing him and going with somebody, you know, with my now stepdad. So my dad moving his whole family to Arizona to have a better life, and then my mom leaving within, you know, a matter of 2 years, like was really, really traumatic for him. That he just went, he had a mania for like 2 or 3 years.
He had a lot of like incremental episodes that would show up.
It was definitely a turning point where, and this was probably 2005, maybe through 2009. It was like probably when I was like in young adolescence to like maybe early, you know, it was probably like the adolescent stage for me, where you kind of still need your parents, going through like a divorce, but it wasn't a normal divorce. It was like my dad's condition took over the divorce, because he got into this mania of like starting to like angry, started to like threaten, you know, and started to kind of be irrational to who he had always been. Because even though he had schizophrenia, he was always protective, you know, he was always, you know. But I think my mom kind of validating, you know, his fears of don't trust anybody, all of that, somebody that he had been with for 20 years.
It just further reinforced it, right?
Right. Instead of normally like being like, okay, you know, a lot of stuff has happened throughout the marriage. Like, what did I do, you know, to contribute to this? You know, kind of looking at both avenues, he just kind of went into like this full force, like kind of rage, and was like kind of threatening. He had ended up going to a mental hospital and was in jail and vanished for a while. I think probably for like a year and a half, my sister and I didn't know where he was. My mom didn't know where he was. So, you know, then he kind of came out of that and became like a born again Christian. And he was like speaking so high of being, you know, a Christian. And
did he learn about religion inside of the in the jail? Or how did that happen? How did that whole transformation happen?
I think I could probably guess so. He needed probably somebody, you know, to turn to or to look to. And I think for him, he doesn't really trust anyone. So better to trust someone that's not, you know, necessarily like
Tangible.
there physically.
Right.
Yeah. It's just more safe for him. So
isn't that interesting that like the belief system of a deity helped him stay like in control of like his current belief system?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And that's the thing that I like. And even knowing that, I always wondered, like, does he hear voices? Because my mom had known that he had schizophrenia, because he was partially diagnosed and had never taken medication, never, ever, in the 90s. And
how old was he at the time in the 90s?
How old was he? He was in his 30s, I think, maybe late 30s. So he, like, when all of, you know, we had moved here and everything, it's already the 2000s. He ended up, we had to do like a court mandated psychiatric. Each of us had to, as members of the family, and the psychiatrist kind of evaluated all of us and came back with my dad had paranoid schizophrenia. It was like really apparent. So for me growing up, I had no idea he had anything. It was just my dad, this is all I knew. So I think I was, by the time we had seen a psychiatrist, I think I was probably 13, 14, like just approaching high school. And he had always acted abnormal, and it would hurt me, and I would be like, why are you maliciously doing this? But I never knew that he had a mental condition and that he couldn't, so it was this weird kind of like, he was never emotionally available to protect his daughters because he was too busy protecting himself. So like being I guess at that point at 13, 14, and I find out from the court that my dad has paranoid schizophrenia, it was like this overwhelm of like,
well, it's the first question of like, what is that and what does that mean, right? Yeah, because you're 13 or 14 years old, like you may have like a general sense from watching TV or something, or like like friends talking about like that condition, or all this like superficial knowledge to where you're going to think like, oh, okay, my dad has this, but what does that actually really mean? And why is he, is that the reason why he's behaving this way? And is this way even right or wrong, quote unquote, right or wrong, saying that very loosely because it's a continuum, obviously. Right. But still, that's, that must be a lot to really try and wrap your head around as a kid, even like on the, like a, not to take away from the condition with your dad with like being diagnosed with that. It's even with kids who experience divorce in general, that's still that's still a time in their lives where they're like, well, what, like the entire belief system that they've understood has now been uprooted. And that's a very vulnerable place for people to be in general, because that is how you're able to cope with everything that's going on. So once that gets uprooted, that is a very scary place for people to be. And that's where a lot of like emotional like disconnects happen, is because people don't know how to cope with that. Because at 13 or 14, you're not taught those cognitive resources, and they're like, okay, this is happening. Let me pull from my cognitive toolbox and use this tool to kind of deal with what's going on. You don't have that. You're like shut down, or like it gets compounded into different conditions that we label as depression or over anxiety and all this stuff like that. But really it's just their belief systems have been changed, and they can't cope. And the body is just acting naturally to kind of cope with that, because they don't have, like I said earlier, they don't have that cognitive like space to be like, okay, I can rationally understand what's going on here.
Right. Yeah. You hit it on the nail. I feel like, you're right. It is a good point with the divorce. Like divorces are already hard, and like some parents are able to be amicable and, put the kids first with it, and understand the importance of the stability and maintaining a good relationship. But I think for
at that age,
some parents can't do that.
It's the cyclical process, man. And it's good that you've gone through this and you've decided to do that, because you're an opportunity to stop that cyclical process.
Right. Yeah. So it was a interesting experience growing up for sure. So going through that, and then, now being older, having, my dad still present, he's just more or less, I think over the years, my mom ended up getting married, and that really, damaged him. He had a lot of years of being very resentful. But now I think he's put his energy into like, Christian, like doing volunteering and doing good things with people. But generally he isolates himself all the time. We had a family home that we had bought to live together in Arizona when we moved from New York. And it was renovating when my parents got their separation or had their separation. It was still under renovation. So he actually still lives in it, and it's not done. It's been like over 10 years, and he put the pause on the renovation. He will not finish it. It's like there are wires in the walls, and we still have stuff from New York that's unpacked and stuff like that. And he still lives in that family house, and he he will not move on. Like it's crazy, this mental, thing that he's just holding on to. I don't know if it's like a comfort thing for him, but he won't even let my sister and I in his home, in the home, like, and that was supposed to be our home, so he won't even let us in his house. He doesn't even trust us to go in his house. He won't let us in the backyard. It's like his safe haven of like, so yeah, even being older and, at least now I recognize, why he won't let us in the house, I don't take that personal, but,
Yeah, it's hard to take that, not take that personal when you initially come
right,
in contact with that, you know what I mean? Especially not
right.
knowing, and obviously like both of our studies in like the psychology field, we're able to kind of cognitively understand like what's going on there based off of like the content that we've learned in school. But
And I think too,
yeah,
you're more, when you go into like our type of field, you're more emotional, like by default. And so that, you take things, if you haven't learned how to rationally combat, the irrational triggers and, what happens for you, yet you would overreact or get really upset about it. So
right.
like, I think, yeah, that's been an interesting, journey. Cause now at this point, me being 24, we've gotten to a point where, we have a good stride, my sister and I with him, where we'll talk to him on the phone, we'll meet him, out in public, or, we'll have him over one of our places. But in public, it's a little bit difficult because he thinks he's a pastor. So he thinks he's a pastor where he needs to save everyone that is in his presence. So it's hard to
That's not
control
uncommon.
him.
That's not
Right,
uncommon for like the Christian religion in general. Like I grew up
right.
in the Christian religion, and it was like customary for us to, like, I remember times when I was growing up with me and my dad, we would go out to hand out these like Christian tracts,
Right,
like
right,
these
right. I
million
saw
dollar
that.
bills. That's like
Right.
walk up to someone like, here's money. And they're like, oh, what? And they read it and it says like have like a scripture on the back of it or whatever. And it's the pretense of like going up to talk to people as if they are not, which is the
Right.
Christian religion uses,
Saved.
like saved. Exactly. So you
Right.
have, it's like this obligation within your religion as well as yourself to save all of these people who don't know what they're doing with their lives. And that
Right.
can be very offensive to people who
To
are
people. Yeah.
chilling and just walking through Sears and like, hey, yo, dude, I'm good, man. I'm going to go get some bedding. Chill out. Like everything's fine.
He's like not a like he's not a like passive Christian. No, he's very like extreme, and
Mm,
so he's like, I think his personality, being a New Yorker and then being like a having his condition and then like thinking that he really needs to save these people, like he puts so much passion into it that like he's gotten like banned from a few Walmarts in
wow.
Arizona. And he actually, one time I went to Denny's with him, and he poured water on our waitress because he asked her if she wanted to be baptized. And
I'm trying not to
that was
laugh, but
really
that's
right.
kind of funny.
It was, and that's the struggle, is like, for me, it's like, okay, I just want my dad, but it's,
Right.
I think over the years, I've gotten to a point where I've came at, with peace with it, where I can laugh and I don't take it, as serious as like my, 10 through 17-year-old self,
Of course.
took it. Because I think the struggle too is like with mental illness, you can't, some people look completely normal, they're completely normal, completely functioning. My dad, no one would probably know, they would probably think he's a little a little bit kooky or crazy, but like they would
Right.
never know the immense amount of trauma he has. And like, they wouldn't know everything, with his condition and everything. So I think for me, it's like, I grew up looking at dad, and it's like, now I kind of have to undo that. And I had that psychiatrist that diagnosed him when I was 13 or 14 actually told me that I had to mourn my dad because he's no longer with me. Like, she said he was dead. And
Wow.
being 13 and 14, or 13, 14, and like you're someone that you don't know and you don't feel comfortable with tells you your father's gone, but he's the most confusing thing because he's still physically here, but he's
clearly
gone.
he's standing right next to me. What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah.
Which further like supports the point that we were talking about earlier. It's like you don't have the resources to cope with what everything is going on, what that actually means. You can't separate yourself from that. It all feels like kind of personal and very confusing because you don't understand what's really going on.
Right. I took it more, I think, growing up as like a personal attack on me. Why is he hurting me? Why is he acting this way? He's trying to embarrass me. Why is this going on?
Why doesn't he listen to me? XYZ, right?
Right. And now, years later, and like, tons of hours of therapy later, I come, to realize like, it was never about me, so I kind of had to undo a lot of that because I think when I was younger, even in high school, everything like that, I had this distrust for people. And so I would always make things about me. Like if someone looked at me the wrong way, I had like self-conscious issues. And I was like, because I never was taught the right way to deal with life and with people. And I always thought everything was about me or who was out to hurt me or who was out to get me, and so it was a crazy journey. And I had realized after, all of this point proven that I wanted to do schizophrenia. I wanted to do trauma, but being in the program, I realized that I can't do schizophrenia. Like after being in the program and you learn,
it's kind of like a conflict of interest almost, right?
Right. Like a counter transference a little bit.
Exactly.
Like clients, like, yeah. And that's, even, I had to, it took
explain
me
to people
a while.
what counter transference means.
Right. Oh, what should I explain it?
Yeah, exactly.
So counter transference is when, a therapist, maybe like, for example, with me, I have a father that has schizophrenia and maybe I have a client that has schizophrenia, or maybe a client that has a dad that has schizophrenia or a mom. I may get triggered by that in session, hearing that. And so my emotions may, conflict, or my emotions, my thoughts, everything would freeze. And I would probably, handle the session with the client, maybe the wrong way because of, my own personal stuff that I haven't taken care of yet. And, that comes up because of that and because of that session. So it's more or less, I guess, negatively impacting the client or having that risk of negatively impacting the client because you went through something. And it kind of helps, I guess, you identify, what you still need to work on as a therapist. You'll have things if you were cheated on and you have a client that cheated, maybe you're going to have sour feelings towards that client because you were cheated on and how that feels. And if you didn't process through that and you didn't heal from that, you're going to treat that client differently and unfairly, because you can't hold that bias opinion.
Right. That's a very underrepresented like aspect about like counseling in general. Like I'm doing sports psychology, so we're focusing more so on helping people's life habits, essentially trying to create goals. How can they get a little bit more cognitively strong to do the things or achieve the things that they want in life, whether that's with sports, life coaching, businesses, XYZ. It's all about like that mental performance. And so in order to objectively be with that person, it's important for you to be able to really understand yourself so that you can separate yourself from what's actually going on with them. And that's a very underrepresented thing. And that's something I learned about through my studies as well. And I'm sure that you did too. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to be able to work because it's more focused. You got to really have a good sense of self. And this is what this major and this profession really challenge you to do. And I really like that about it. And that's something I've really enjoyed. Right.
Yeah. I had no idea that countertransference. I mean, I was, before I even started my program, I was a client, in therapy for, 3 or 4 years already. So I think I had no idea that your therapist could be, transferred. And I think back and I'm like, oh my gosh, are there any times where I actually did have, I could kind of, after learning that, I look back to my first session that I had in therapy, and my therapist, when she first saw me, I was at my wit's end. I was like, I was at a place back then when I got to therapy, or what brought me to therapy, I just was almost like suicidal feeling. Like it was a really, really low place where I had nobody except the guy I was dating, because I didn't know how to let people in. I was already pushing and pulling with him, and I was afraid to lose him, as I knew if I lost him, I would have nobody, because I didn't trust anybody. So that was a really low place for me. And so what brought me to therapy was, I was like 19, I think, at the time. So really vulnerable place. And I remember I had walked into session with her, and I just word vomited, cried. I told her everything, that brought me to that point, and how alone I felt, and that, I had this family background and whatever. And I remember the session was like an hour, but it felt like it was like 5 minutes, because I just had so much to tell her. And she started crying in the session, and she cried with me. She started crying, and looking like that was such a powerful session, because I had never gotten all of that off my chest before in my life. And I couldn't wait until the next session with her. And now looking back at that moment, I wonder if she was, had any transference, during that session. Maybe I reminded her, because I kind of resemble her with, appearance wise a little bit. And she has mentioned to me that there are some resemblances now, years later. But I wonder, what it was that I said that, kind of like, touched her, and
right,
react
hit her
like
on like
that.
I've experienced that too. I mean,
Right.
it's so much of an experience that I've had that I'm like crying right now, because it's that
Right.
personal to me. Right. How
Right.
did you like physiologically feel after that session?
I think during that time, I was just it affected my entire body. I always had a fatigue. I wasn't really dealing with anxiety yet at that time. I had dealt with anxiety in the past. During the time I was seeing her, I had actually took probably from 14 to 19, and I kind of X'd my dad out of my life, because I just couldn't handle it. And it was too much. He was too overwhelming for me. Every time I spoke to him, it was always the most extreme stuff. Because, for example, if I tell him something small, like I'm getting Invisalign, or I have contacts, or blah, 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 he'll be like, the government is watching you through your contacts. You have to get rid of that. You have to, and it's like, you can't tell him one thing without him blowing it out of, and, it's like you're walking on eggshells. So being young, not even being able to handle myself, and then having such extreme reactions from someone, I couldn't deal with it. So I kind of just stopped talking to him for a long time. It was probably 5 or 6 years. And it wasn't because of any other reason, just that he was just really, really hard. And I was already dealing with myself, and couldn't even deal with myself. So when I had saw her, she kind of helped me with coming to terms with that, and being able to get to a place where I was able to kind of let him back in slowly. And for him, he like kind of, I guess, like took a long time to let me back in too, because we triggered each other. So it was a long process of getting to any relationship with him again, because we were both. So, I mean, at that point, I didn't have any anxiety or anything, but I think it was just, I had so many emotions that were irrational all the time. I felt tired all the time. I was exhausted all the time. Every time I had a session with her, I would like go to bed the rest of the day. All my free time, I would go to bed. I don't know if that was like a partial depression too, because I probably, like just couldn't deal. Like that was just my way of dealing with all my overwhelming emotions at
Just
that
shut
time.
down, don't deal with it, because I
Right.
don't know how to. Right.
Right. And I was more of an internal person growing up, like where, if I didn't trust anyone, so I isolated myself from everyone. I dealt with everything on my own, more of like an introverted, type of way. Like I don't trust anyone with my emotions. So finally letting all that out, it felt amazing. But then you're processing it and you're reliving it while you're telling it. So it was kind of like this, backwards, which one is right, because you're telling it, you're processing it, it's overwhelming. But then if you don't do that, you're keeping it all bottled in. So it's kind of like pulling off a Band-Aid, I guess. It was a long process. It was overwhelming for sure. And then with the EMDR therapy, that got introduced also.
Right.
Within a year, that was introduced. So
Yeah. Unboxing a belief and like kind of reinstating a new belief is not really talked about that much in
right.
like average day conversation. I mean, understandably so. It's very personal and stuff. But the work that goes into creating a new belief system, it's as if you are first uprooting the old belief system, and then every time you get triggered when that old belief system would pop up, it's about creating that new belief system and replacing it. So it's not just like this one time I went to therapy, I said this session, I had this good session, I walked out of it and I felt completely fine, right? And I'm like, all right, everything's really good, take on the world. That was the false impression that I had with it, is that once I talk about it, okay, now I'm fixed, now everything's good. No, like you feel better for sure, but it's a constant process of constantly reinstating that new belief system to replace that old belief system, and it's very difficult.
Right. Yeah.
Which is why it was such a long process.
Where beliefs come from too. They could come from literally the smallest thing that you went through in your life growing up, like a small T trauma, or it could come from like a big T trauma, like something crazy happening. It could be the way someone looked at you. Now you always have to look in the mirror because you're afraid, because that one person looked at you the wrong way. You interpreted their facial expression that something's wrong with me, and you took that growing up, and you feel like something is wrong with you, until
especially when there's a lack of like that confidence within yourself, so you're always constantly trying to change your appearance or your actions in order to like match what those people, like your peers, are like kind of presenting to you. And that's a very, very confusing space to be in, because at times it will work and then at times that it won't, and then you constantly change it. And it's I felt very lost within those experiences. It's like you're lost within yourself. And how did you feel when you were going through that, when someone would look at you some way and you would think about, okay, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think growing up, being so in my own world all the time, because I didn't think about anyone else. I only thought about me and who's hurting me and everything like that. I think I did have a lot of even self-esteem issues because of the way I was taught to have a thought process, was always protecting yourself. So, just the way, people acted towards me, I would find the way to make it the most negative of like, what's wrong with me, or, is it because, I have glasses? I remember I would just put limitations on my appearance. I wouldn't wear glasses because I thought people were going to make fun of me. I would never put my hair up because I thought that people were going to make fun of me, and I think being in my first relationship kind of helped a lot, because that was kind of the first time I let someone in. And it was always like, why do you feel that way? You look great. Like, why do you, and that kind of, I think, helps me a lot, because even though I didn't know how to show him I trusted him or truly feel it, I did let him in. So there was something that I had somewhere, my conscious was combating my subconscious, to say, you need to trust this person. I just didn't know how. I had all these,
but you want to, like, you really want to trust him. It's like, I want to feel this. I really want to. I just currently right now in this present moment, I do not know how to, and I'm really trying. Right.
It's kind of like a cognitive dissonance moment where you're just like, you acknowledge that, yeah, it's that you're not making sense, but you don't know how to change it because you always have that automatic negative reaction. So yeah, and then usually, like, yeah, you said it has to do with a compilation of beliefs or just one belief. Typically, I feel like it's a compilation if you're reacting to that extent of different beliefs that need to be processed through. But yeah, it's a lot of stuff that people just don't even realize about the way they react to things or get annoyed for no reason.
Right.
Everything is about beliefs.
It is, and that's one thing that I was really thinking about when you were like when we started this conversation. It's just people may think that things that are going on in their life, the way that they're feeling, the way that they're thinking, that something's wrong with them, but
Right.
it's really just as simple as how are you viewing the world? What
Right.
is your belief system about the way that people do things? And up until people come in contact with this new form of belief system or this opportunity, like, hey, like neuroplasticity, man, you can change this. Like you can change this
Right.
if you want to. But up until, that's the struggle. It's because if people are feeling comfortable within like the peer group that they're inside, they're constantly going to continue to stay inside of that mindset,
Right.
and there's and like I was saying earlier, up until you get to that position to where you come in contact with like a new form of like viewing the world, and you're allowing yourself to be open to even let that in, to really try and like think about, all right, comparing how do I think now comparing to like how does this belief system work? Does my belief system make me feel good? Do I feel good with the way that I feel and that I view the world? Do I feel
Right.
anxiety with my belief system? And could this belief system be a way for me to kind of break away from that anxiety that I have?
Right.
But it's tough because, like I said, information, one, as well as allowing yourself to be receptive to that new belief system, that it could change your life. And it's really,
Right.
the act of itself is simple. It's like, yeah, it's just a belief system. But what we were talking about earlier, it's like old belief system comes up, reinstate new belief system. It's an everyday constant
Right.
process of introspection and objectivity and self-reflection and all these different practices that
Right.
would really help you get to that position to where you're like, all right, I'm separating from the old and I'm reinstating the new.
And a lot of people don't have the patience or even believe that, it's old stuff that is the reason why you're acting the way you are now. So
Right.
that's why, it could be so difficult with certain people where they stay in their, in their head and they're, because they don't, realize that it is all old for the most part.
Right.
Everything
And
is
from my
old.
experience, it's so much easier to externalize it. If you would
Right.
just treat me differently, if you would just do this differently, right? But that trigger that
Right.
you're feeling is the actual belief system. And it's
Right.
hard. It's hard to separate yourself as like, okay, I'm not the reason this is happening. Clearly it's you. Like
Right.
clearly you're not making me feel better. Clearly you're making me feel this type of way. Like
Right.
no one's making you feel anything. It's the way that you're perceiving the situation to be. And
Right.
that's hard to sit with, because like from my experience, that is a lot to carry. It's like, yo, the way that your life is happening and the way that you're perceiving the world, it's on you, man. And
Right.
that's where you were talking about like the patience of like trying to be patient with yourself to get yourself out of that belief system to like reinstate the new. It's difficult.
It is. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy how, you can literally, if you grow, and you get past those beliefs, you sometimes can like, get rid of your old shell and just become this whole new person. I look back and like, who I was, 3 years ago is completely different than who I am now. And I think that's because my relationship ended at that time. And I think there was a little bit of, at that time, I was afraid to fully change because I think I subconsciously knew that if I changed, my relationship would end. It was kind of like, he started to like me for someone that I didn't even know who I was, and then as the relationship grew on, it was like I was becoming this emotional person that would have deep conversations with people. And I, I empathized with people, and he was this guy that was going to engineering school, and emotions were not what he wanted to hear about. And, he would always kind of shame the fact that people would always come up to me, and he would always say, like, oh, are you going to have an emotional conversation with the waiter now? Like, are you going to hear the waiter's whole story, type of shaming. Right. So, but, I think it was, we were both so comfortable with each other. It was a long, relationship when we were young, that I kind of fully spread my wings when it was done, and I think the cheating for me could have been this, it was the thing that I was dreading for 5 years, thinking that it was going to happen, making it up in my head, almost to the point where it ended up driving him. I know that wasn't what it was, but it was obviously something different. But that happened. It was such a blessing for me, because then it's like now I know who I am. I've had so much time to be by myself and think, and have these great relationships with people, and let people in, and all of that, and go to therapy more, and all of that. It helps so much, especially when you're younger, because obviously they say when you're older, it's hard, because your beliefs are so ingrained in you that, they say that, older people are harder to change.
Right.
Like when you're young, it's like,
you get emotionally connected to those beliefs. That's why it's hard to change it. Because it's like, once it pops up, it's like, oof, this is an emotion. I'm feeling this. This must be true. This must be right. This is right. This is true, but to question that it's difficult. It's challenging, and it's nerve-wracking, because you're literally putting yourself on the limb. Because everything that your belief system is telling you to kind of like close up, be secure, like don't let people in, that belief system, now you're trying to change it and open it up to like, all right, let people in. It's like, the hell? Fuck no, I'm not doing that. That's scary as hell. I'm not going to do it. Like, why would I do that? Right. But that example is the act of reinstating the new belief. It's allowing yourself to feel that vulnerability.
Right. I think, if I think about, like, maybe I wish someone said to my dad when he was younger, what the way you think, like, isn't normal, or like, like maybe, that would have affected him differently, now, where he would be different now. But I think him not having anyone that was like that, where like they bring up that, you should be more, trusting, or why do you close people off so much, or whatever, I wonder if things would have changed if he was younger and someone had said that to him,
Right.
So yeah, it is crazy when people, you just get older, and things get more and more validated the older you get, and then it gets to a point where you won't even hear anybody. You won't hear
so
anything.
Rooted in what you believe, right?
Right. And most people, I feel like with therapy, they don't feel like they need it, or maybe they think about it, if something bad is going on, but it would take probably a tragedy, or, as a crisis moment where they have a breakup or something like that, or they may break up with someone, to actually get them in the session. And that's something that I spoke with my therapist about, or just mentors in general, about, like, how therapy is more or less the crisis management work at first. And then when the person realizes, wow, this is really beneficial for me, this isn't what I thought it was, that's when you have the long-term patience, but typically it's something extreme, to get them finally in session.
100%. Because they want, like, I'm hurting right now. Therapy will help it take it away. Therapy will help take this pain away that's going on, right? But if you're consistent with it, you end up finding out that, so what I'm trying to say is the initial reason you go into therapy is never the concluding reason why you're actually really in therapy.
Right.
Everything starts to trickle down to where you're like, what we've been talking about this entire time, like, all right, well, how do you view the world? And it's like, oh, okay, this is what's been going on. My childhood has really been the compounding effects of my current reality right now. Interesting. That's not what I expected, but here we are. So
I thought I was just going to get a bunch of answers. Like, as
Right.
soon as I got into therapy, I thought she was going to tell me what to do. Like, I thought she was going to give me direction, but there was none of that.
No, it was more so just like, all right, like, what's going on? And you're like, what?
Right.
No. Like, validate me. Tell me that what that person did was fucked up. Tell me that I'm a good person. Tell me that I'm not doing anything wrong. Why do you think you're not doing anything wrong? And then it just goes from there.
Right. Yeah. Because in therapy, I mean, and I'm sure you're learning this in school too. I never knew it was an 80-20 dynamic where the client is talking for 80, the counselor's only chiming in for 20% of that to probe, maybe thought or conversation. You really don't say much as a therapist. And I don't think clients realize that really, because you're so in it when you're the client, and I found that crazy because I was like, what? I'm such an opinionated person being, raised by 2 New York parents that my mouth won't stop going, and so it's so funny, now being in, a program where you're doing we do, it's like our program started with 30 of us. And then now almost 3 years later, there's only 7 of us. So many people.
Remember you telling me about that. People are just trickling off on each level.
Dropping like flies. So now we all do, the one-on-one type of session, mocks of a session where one of us will be a client, the other one will be, and then our professor will watch us, kind of do that dynamic, or our professor will give us a test dynamic or a test client to pretend we are with this situation and whatever. And it's really hard being the therapist. It's actually crazy. I never realized how much of a skill it is, being a therapist, because you can be empathetic. You can be someone that, you care about other people and that you're a good listener, but there's so much more to it. That's
an important those traits will get you in the door of all right, this is what I want to do. I'm empathetic. I want to be open. I want to help people.
Right.
But there's a lot more technical skills that goes into it. One of them is silence. That's what I've learned. It's the importance of silence, because especially with, so if we're talking and, it's maybe especially early on in the set when people come into the crisis management you were talking about, people are just saying their guts, this is what happened to me, and the therapist just kind of sitting there. Someone's talking, therapist sits there, they're uncomfortable with the silence, so they keep talking more, which is good because you want them to tell you all the information so you can start to really process okay, how is this person viewing the world? How is this person viewing what's going on? And that's similar with me with sports psychology. It's okay, what is your brain thinking about, when you're on the field, and how is your confidence levels? What do you think about confidence? And the more that you explain how you play the game, your pre-routines, what you're thinking on the field, what are you focusing on, the more that you give me, the more information I can start to figure out, okay, which techniques would work for you and how we can move forward with this.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's a crazy thing to think about. Yeah. It's a huge projection on you as a person. Are you comfortable with silence? Are you comfortable with, if you're a family therapist or you're working with multiple athletes or a couple, are you comfortable with dynamics, in general?
You got to find your niche. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's honestly, it's a crazy field to be going into, but I had known that for a while that I, even though I didn't trust people, growing up, I knew that I trusted myself, and I always knew that I had good intention, even though I didn't trust anyone else. So it was crazy because, I ended up getting to the point where, I realized by seeking my own therapy that was I want to do this. This is, this is what I want to do. This makes complete sense. This is me, and I lived, breathed it, everything, reading so many self-help books or listening to podcasts. It's what I do on a daily, or trying to understand someone for them, you know, like, it's like, no,
It's a
that's
very,
not your job.
yeah, it's an interesting
Right.
relationship with like the academia is because the more that you study, the more reinforced it gets of like,
Right.
okay, this is something I really want to do because I'm starting to understand the academia more. Therefore, I'm starting to understand myself a little bit more. And it's like this
Right.
constant self-improvement process, this constant self-reflection process, which is why I've always loved the psychology field, is because everything that I'm learning is applicable to my life. It's not like
Right.
I'm taking my math test and then I leave and I'm like, okay, now what do I do? Everything
Right.
that I'm learning. It's like, oh, I can apply this in my life. And that's why it's been really easy for me to learn the stuff as well as continuously stay in the program, is because it's very applicable to me and I get to learn about myself and help other people at the same
Right.
time and get paid for that. That's chill.
And that's the
That's
thing that
chill.
I think is crazy, is the fact that, yeah, therapists, we all want to, or aspiring therapists or therapists in general, we want to help ourselves, and that's what brings us into it. And one thing, I don't know if you've gotten taught this in your program. In my program, they really emphasized in the beginning of the program the importance of like maintaining your own psychological fitness. And if you're not okay, you cannot help any clients, and that you are your first priority. The clients and everybody else are the second priority. And like, you know, how important that is to make sure you're staying in check with, what do I need? Am I okay? Do I, you know, what do I need to do to have my cup filled, you know, or 3/4 filled to get myself through the day, you know? And I think that that's always been a struggle for me that I'm going to probably continue to have. And I think it's a struggle for everyone. But when you're working full time and you're in a program, it's like you have no time to be
You have to,
psychologically
yeah.
fit. So that's something that I always think about too, is like, I need to still be in therapy. I still need to, what do I need to do for myself right now? You know,
Right.
because this would be what I'm thinking about, you know, when I'm with clients after the day, is myself, you know, am I okay after all these sessions that I've had, you know, today?
Yeah.
Or
And
even having,
they definitely taught us that it's like, you need
yeah,
to be good. And that's been such, and that's the huge opportunity with being in school for this, is that this is where you start to practice that, you know,
right,
especially like for this stage of our lives, it's a very developmental stage. You know, people think
right,
adolescent, 100% childhood, adolescence, huge developmental stage. But once you get into like the early 20s and then coming into even into your 30s, it's like you're creating how you want to live the rest of your life. So we really
right.
have to continue to create that space, like you're saying, to like fill our cup. And that's something I've been learning as well.
Yeah,
It's
I
yeah,
agree with
yeah.
you. I agree. Like, the adolescent stage is a big stage, but honestly, I think young adulthood is like really when you're learning about yourself and you're growing. And it's like, it's almost like you are living for the first time. It's a very important time.
Second life for sure. Like
Right,
definitely this conscious like wake up of like, oh, fuck, things that I do, they manipulate things. Everything is like connected, and it starts with me. And it's
right,
like, shit, okay, all right, we gotta wake up. I need to wake up. I need to get engaged in what's going on, or else
right,
everything's just gonna start happening to me. And that's
right.
it's I don't even have any words for it. It's just it's a, like you're saying, I definitely agree with you about the like the new life. It's like a second life for sure.
Yeah, and then you just want everyone else to like go through it too.
Yeah,
That some people aren't there.
yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I definitely have my areas of opportunities for growth, is what I call opportunities for growth,
Right,
and that comes with what like with what we were talking about earlier. It's just like that constant um, like self reflection and
right.
introspection, and being able to like understand like, all right, what am I doing right now, and how is it affecting the people around me, and how is it affecting me? So,
How do you, not to turn this around
ooh,
on
a
you,
question. I love it.
I
What's
know
up?
you're the interviewer, but
No,
like,
bring it on.
how do you, like, because I know for myself at least, the more I've learned about myself, the more like I like people that are receptive and are, you know, have some sense of emotion, that I gravitate more towards those people in my personal life. Are you the same way? Like, with like, how do you, like, I guess I would say, like, people that are different than you or different beliefs? than you with like therapy, things like that.
I would say that I'm fortunate enough to be around a social circle that encourages therapy and has gone through their own therapy as well. Because someone who hasn't experienced it, you're not going to be able to really connect with them on that level. And so it's a little bit difficult. And I really encourage depth in conversation. I am not a big fan of superficialities and kind of just like, hey, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Not a really big fan of like superficialities and stuff. And it's like, oh, weather's great. And yeah, and sports teams and all this other stuff. Like, yeah, I'll shoot the shit every now and then. But eventually it's like, yo, like, can we be legit friends if we can have legit conversations about, dude, what's going on? How you feeling? Like, I really try to encourage that with my friends. It's like, talk to me, man. What's up? Like, let's just talk about what you're going through. And if my relationships are not based in that with like my friends, if anything, I'm the one that's going to open up that avenue to like, hey, like, let's make this a part of our dynamic. And I work towards that. And it's not like, it's not in a way of like manipulation or like, hey, think of the way that I think. It's more so just creating that space for that conversation. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So same question to you. Do you try and, yeah, it does.
Do I what?
So I was saying same question to you. Do you try and keep people in your social circle that are around that same level, like a frequency, we'll call it, of like involved in therapy?
I think for me, I do the closer people that I have are probably more on an emotional level. If they're not, I will usually bring them there. Yeah, like kind of similar to what you said. It's like, all right, they probably have maybe a few weeks, before, or like maybe even overnight in one conversation, I'll like bring up all this old stuff for them just by asking them questions. And then it gets them triggered and they're thinking about it or whatever. And then they're asking me questions, or I'm giving them my therapist's phone number. That's happened to me all the time. Like, happened to me one time, I met this girl at Spin at a cycle class, and we talked outside of class and we kept talking. And then she's telling me about how her dad passed away and she has all these codependent dynamics with men and, all this. And then, then I gave her my therapist number and she reached out to my therapist, because obviously I don't want to nourish a friendship where it's just me helping her all the time and it's like a 100%. One-way beneficial thing.
Right.
And so that was kind of where I like set boundaries with her, because she was just someone that I met, but she wasn't like a friend. But if I could have like, I think generally my friends have some sort of awareness because they will project it back on me, because I'm not, like we talked about, we're not perfect people, and we need people to call us out on, our stuff, or, we need people to address things with us or bring, give us advice or give us guidance, because we're not perfect. Some people unfortunately put therapists on a pedestal because, we're the ones that are helping, or they're the ones that are helping, thinking that therapists are like a God form almost. And I have
like they've been spawned from heaven, of like they have all knowledge of everything. It's like, well, the knowledge comes from literature, but also comes from our experience of learning through what mistakes have I made, what paths have I gone down, and how that's affected me. And connecting it to literature from the scientific
that's
perspective.
how I do relationships, is like, I need somebody that understands that, like, that I'm like, that could give me back feedback as well. Other people, usually are just more or less acquaintances where I don't really have like super close relationships with them, because you have to kind of channel your energy, in a limited fashion. But yeah, I agree. I read this book. It's called, what is it called? It's called What They Never Told You in Grad School. And it's a book about clinical like therapists, like what they never told you in grad school that you learn outside of the field, like in the field when you actually get in the field. And it's honestly one of the best books I've ever read. That gives you like a really good perspective of like, being a therapist and the mental health field, and how clients just treat you like a god, and then you go through this like depression of like, you know, should I be making mistakes? You kind of like question yourself because
like put yourself in this perfectionism bubble, right?
Right, yeah. And it's honestly the most interesting book because I had never thought about it that way, that, you know, clients, you know, do look at you at like, you know, everything and that you have the answers. And so when you're, you know, feeling down or you're, you know, you need self-care, you may just be like, no, I don't need self-care. Like, I'm fine. I should be able to handle this. You know, you kind of get this like weird complex of like, I can handle anything, even though you have to remind yourself, like, I'm a person, like bring yourself back down.
I definitely understand that. That's the belief I already put on myself without even understanding this field. It's like perfectionism. Yeah. That book that you're talking about, it kind of reminded me of this book I first read in my first counseling skills class. It was The Gift of Therapy by what was his name? Irvin Yalom. And it's similar to like the book that you're talking about. It's like there's actual like case studies from what he's experienced, and like he goes into the depth of like, all right, like I hope you understand what you're getting into, because this can be a very tough profession of and almost like self-isolation in a way, because you're emotionally giving so much energy to all these clients, especially if you're working a full-time like job with them. It's like, how much time do you want to give to yourself after giving all that time to other people? And so that's where he talks about like, it's really important that you need to do that. And that's like what sounds like that's what the book was also talking about as well that you read. It's like, hey, just be aware of this, like understand, like this is what the game is about. Like this is what isn't involved in the profession.
Yeah, it was essentially, I think, the author just was saying like, I've been in the field for 30 years and this is 30 years of knowledge, you know, that you're going to be learning just going into the field type of thing. Yeah, it's just things that you never really, realize. It's a crazy thing.
The practical experience. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's crazy.
So, so you got a new dog.
Yeah, I did get a dog. You want to see him?
Yeah, let's see him.
He spilled my coffee while we were talking.
Since it's a podcast, he's a tiny little black dog, a big old beautiful eyes.
Yes.
Got a gray and white chest. He's about as big as a crunchy wrap gordita at Taco Bell. He's pretty tiny. Yeah.
He's 1 pound and 3 ounces.
1 pound and 3 ounces. There you go.
I took him hiking with me yesterday. He is the woman sold him as a dachshund, but took him to the vet and he's a terrier mix. So I love him either way. I'm like, you can be whoever you are and I still love you. It's okay.
You got the cutest face in the world, so how couldn't I?
Right. I'm like, how can you, care about a breed, you know, for this guy? So, he was also, she had told me he was 8 weeks, but he is most definitely was 5 weeks when she sold him. So that's been a whole nother thing, because he is very, very young and he should still be with his mom right now type of young. So he has like psychological stuff that may, you know, come up when he gets older, just because he should have had his mom.
It's a good thing you're in this area, right?
right. I'm like, good thing I'm in. Yeah, it's almost was meant to be almost. He literally has his own psychiatric dog therapist now.
How did he do on the hike?
He didn't do. I actually prepped to keep him in my backpack. I had like a little compartment that he could be in because he's so tiny. But I think it was so hot, you know, yesterday, and in the actual compartment, I think he was getting hot. So I just held him the entire time. It was a full hike at Squaw Peak, and I literally held this dog the entire time. Like, it was so funny. That was, I was like, you're staying inside from now on.
Carrying him around like a football. He's like a running back.
Right. And obviously sometimes you need your hands when you're hiking. So that was a whole nother challenge. But at least he got to experience some of Arizona. He'll, you know, that'll be enough for right now for him.
Just get some outdoor exposure. Yeah, I'm definitely getting the feeling and like the drive to like get a leash for my cat. I'm gonna be one of those people. Yeah, my neighbor at East Ridge, the apartment I lived in Tempe, she had a leash for her cat, and I remember seeing. I was like, "What the hell? Like, come
You're
on
gonna
now."
be that cat dad.
I'm definitely gonna be that guy, and I'm completely content with it because I already let Faith out, and I let Faith and Zeb out, and they'll roam around the apartment area, and I'll just like kind of like snap my fingers or call them over, and they'll come back. So
wow.
yeah, it's pretty cool. They're pretty
cool.
smart. Yeah. I was a little nervous, but I taught Faith when she was younger, and Zeb was 6 when we got him. So when he was I was a little nervous about it, but he's been pretty obedient. But I want like them to get out. It's just they love it outside and they really enjoy it. I think it'd be cool. So yeah. I'll be a guy walking a cat on a leash.
I mean, I've seen people with their bikes and they have like a little compartment at the end of their bike with like, you know, I think usually you can keep your young child in there, but I've seen people with cats, you know, and dogs.
That's definitely like a double take. Like, wait, what? Was that a cat?
Right.
Was that a cat? One of my big goals is to like make this socially acceptable, where it's like people are walking dogs, like, oh, that guy's just going on a run with his cat. Everything's cool. And start changing the breed, but yeah.
That's hilarious. That would be so funny. I'm sure if anyone could do it, you could do it.
That'd be ideal. That'd be fun.
That's funny. That's hilarious.
Alrighty, so I really enjoyed this conversation with you. Thank you for taking the time.
We were all over the place. Is that normal?
No, I really think we were a lot more centralized than you're thinking. Yeah.
Okay, good.
When you listen to it, we were definitely talking a lot about like one topic of like belief systems and stuff. And I thank you for taking the time in the space to share this with me for the inaugural podcast. So.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear it. What are your plans for like getting everything like released and stuff? Because you just did your friend too, right? Like you did a podcast with your friend.
Yeah, it was like a test podcast, and so I just wanted to see it because I was going to use the Zoom or the Skype like platform because of the social distancing and stuff like that. And I was just trying to figure out how I can separate the video from the audio. I found a program in order to do that. So. It'll be up here pretty soon. So I'm trying, like once we're done here in a little bit, I'm just going to go take it off and then separate it and then upload it. And I'll definitely let you know.
Yeah. Let me in on it as soon as you're done editing it.
I will for sure.
Okay, cool. All right. Sounds good. Q.
All right. So until next time. No, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.